I would like to call the May 9th, 2023 Committee of the Whole Public Meeting to order. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on our unceded Algonquin homelands. I would like to thank the Algonquin nations for hosting this meeting on their land. I would now like to ask if anyone has an interest to declare, to please do so now. Seeing none, if there are any, I would like to remind members to share declarations relating to board services immediately following the meeting. I now call for a mover to approve the agenda. Let's be Scott. If anyone has any changes to the agenda. Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. I will now turn to Chair Evans to provide a briefing from the chair of the chair's board. Let's see. Evans.
Thank you. Earlier this afternoon, I had a chance to meet with the Standing Committee on Social Policy in Toronto. I raised the concerns that we had around the removal of local autonomy and developing around funding envelopes, around developing and communicating strategic priorities, around the changes to disposal of property, around the implementation of design standards, which remove the ability of local boards to be innovative or collaborative, around changing curriculum in response to labor conditions, amongst other concerns. I raised our support for the renewed focus on apprenticeship pathways, the changes to the code of conduct, and the regular curriculum review cycle. These are all changes to Bill 98, which has been put forward by the provincial government. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take questions about this.
Thank you, Chair Evans. Are there any questions? Seeing none, does that conclude your report, Chair Evans?
It does.
Thank you. I will now turn to Director Drew for her briefing.
Madam Chair, just a brief update on the issue with respect to police involvement in the schools. So our thanks to the different perspective on this issue over the last week. We did communicate with parents, students, and staff last week to provide an update on our next steps, and just to let people know that yesterday myself and the assistant director and one of our superintendents of 6 schools did have a meeting with the president of the Ottawa Police Association and a couple of his colleagues, and that was a great opportunity for us to connect and to hear from the Police Association and the perspective of their members in the community work they do to support students in school and in the community. We also have a meeting scheduled with the Deputy Chief, where we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about partnership opportunities between the school district and the police. And later in the month, I'll be meeting with the chief as well. So just to let people know that work is underway on that, and we will report back to the board. Some other items of interest. So in terms of summer learning opportunities, registration is now open for our summer school programs. These programs are designed for students in grades 6 to 12, as well as adult learners. We offer a range of options for credit recovery, upgrades, and e-learning, and more information can be found on the district website. Some supports for students and parents through our speech language pathologists. Tomorrow, they will be holding a session to provide parents information and resources about developing children's communication skills. This is an open house the team is holding due to high interest and engagement. They held a session in March and there was a demand for more. So the team is generously scheduled a second session. As a reminder, any parents or caregivers with questions or concerns about their child's communication skills are encouraged to speak with their teacher as a starting point. On outdoor learning initiatives, this Saturday, May the 13th, the public is invited to the annual Open Trails Day at the Bill Mason Outdoor Education Center. It's a great opportunity to enjoy the beautiful spring weather and see our 77th acre outdoor class. So for trustees who haven't had the chance to see Bill Mason, this is a great opportunity. And in terms of our work in global education, last month, the school district was able to welcome 70 grade 11 students from Yokohama, Japan, for an exchange program with OCDSB. Those students attended Green Wilson, Canterbury High School, Colonel By Secondary School, and Gloucester High School for a 2-week period. This is the 3rd year in the Ottawa-Yokohama exchange. This summer, 34 OCDSB students will head to Yokohama for the 2nd phase of the exchange. So great opportunity for global awareness and to support our international education certificate. That's important.
Thank you, Director Giroux. Are there any questions for the director? Seeing none. So there's no delegations. This evening, I now call upon Director Giroux to introduce the report 23-036.
I'm going to invite Executive Officer McCoy, who has done tremendous work on this, to walk you through the report.
Go ahead, Executive Officer.
I want to start by acknowledging the contributions of Manager Guthrie, as well as the members of our policy team, Kenan Omakajic and MG Abdul Messiah, who also worked hard in terms of bringing forward the revisions to the policy. As indicated in the report, the revisions to this policy are coming forward pursuant to Regulation 246-18, which requires that school boards review and confirm their codes of conduct prior to May 15th of 2023. We did bring forward a report at a previous committee of the whole to provide trustees with an opportunity to consider what changes they would like to make, as well as to provide feedback. And some of that feedback has been incorporated into the revised policy that we are bringing forward. In addition, as part of the review, we did look at the codes of conduct that are in place in other large school boards in the province, including those that have integrity commissioners in place, in order to identify any gaps in our current policy and to see if there were changes that we should be bringing forward for consideration by the board. You'll see at paragraph 4 of the report a summary of the key proposed changes that we are bringing forward this evening. So in addition to migrating the policy to the new policy template that we have been using, we have tried to provide some other clarification in the policy, including, for example, clarifying use of the term board member as opposed to a trustee, clarifying the scope of the policy in terms of the kinds of communications that it applies to, as well as clarifying that it applies to social media. Expanding the list of legislation that applies to trustees and their conduct. Providing a new section that clarifies that employment or prospective employment cannot affect members' performance of their duties as a trustee. Including in the list of policies that are explicitly listed for trustees, the human rights policy that was approved since the code of conduct was last reviewed by the board. And you'll see there are a number of other proposed changes, again, that either emerged from our review of the policies in place in other boards, or to align with practices that are in place and issues that have emerged through the implementation of the policy. I should note that we did, as part of our consultation, take the policy to our audit committee and did receive some feedback from audit, specifically a recommendation from the audit committee, which supported the inclusion of an acknowledgement, a requirement for trustees to sign an acknowledgement that they have received and read the policy in every election year, and as well provided some other comments and feedback on the matters that we were bringing forward. And in general, I think we're supportive of the changes that we had identified at that time. In addition, we did post the policy on our website, as we have been doing as part of our consultation process for tier 2 policy reviews. And so we did post and received very little feedback from the public with regard to this particular policy. Also wanted to draw your attention to paragraph 6, which talks about Bill 98, which the chair just referred to. There are provisions in the proposed bill which deal specifically with codes of conduct and provides for a centralized integrity commissioner process. We've provided a summary of some of the major amendments within the proposed bill in this particular area. And so it is possible that with the passage of the bill, unless there are amendments, that it may be necessary for the board to reconsider to ensure that the policy as hopefully approved this evening is in line with the new legislation. However, notwithstanding the introduction of the bill, the requirement for boards to review and confirm their existing codes by May 15th still remains in place. And so we are recommending that the board proceed with considering the proposed revisions that we are bringing forward this evening. We have included the revised policy at Appendix A, and happy to answer any questions. And I know that there were already some amendments which have been forwarded to Manager Guthrie this afternoon for consideration.
Thank you, Executive Officer. I do have a speakers list, and I will begin with Trustee Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to recommend a statement.
Thank you.
Open the introduction.
Thank you. I turn now to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I did have one question for clarification from staff, if possible. And that is with regard to the new section, which clarifies that employment cannot affect the member performance of their duties to the board. I would just like to understand a little more fully what that actually would mean in practice. That was section 3.13.
Go ahead, Executive Officer.
Through you, Chair. So the effective or the effect of that particular provision would be to ensure that where there was a potential conflict or where perhaps there were circumstances where a trustee, in terms of their regular employment or any prospective future employment, that there was I guess a conflict is the best way of stating it, that would bring that into would bring their employment into conflict with the performance of their responsibilities, that they would not allow that to happen, in the sense that they would be obligated, for example, to declare that conflict. And if they fail to do so, notwithstanding what implications might come from the Conflict of Interest Act, that if they were found to have allowed their current employment or future employment to improperly affect their performance, that it would, in addition to whatever might arise from that legislation, be deemed to be a breach of the code of conduct as well.
Thank you, Executive Officer. Trustee Scott.
I appreciate that clarification because what was raised to me was a concern that it could potentially mean that if, for example, you were unable to fulfill all of your duties of the board because you had a job during the day, that could be problematic. So I think it's important for it to be understood that that is not what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. So we do have a series of amendments, and we're going to go in order. But before I move to those, are there any further questions of clarification from any members of the committee? Seeing none, I would ask Manager Guthrie to put the first amendment up. Sorry, I can't see, so I'm gonna turn my back on some of you first. There we go. So the first amendment we're dealing with is from Trustee Scott. Go ahead, Trustee Scott.
Thank you. I would like to move this amendment to section 3.2. My concern was that to the way that it's worded with the placement of the word involving, or sorry, including in their interactions with other things, that actually we didn't need to have the word including there at all. But we did need to add students because we are also expected to obey the code of conduct with regard to students, and just wanted to smooth out the last part of the sentence.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. Is this a friendly amendment? Trustee Milmore?
I apologize.
We couldn't hear you, Trustee Milborn.
Oh,
A little bit there.
okay. I will try to project my voice a bit better. I apologize. I'm having trouble seeing the screen, but I did ask if we could also add media interactions into the list as well. And perhaps if Manager Guthrie could share with me the amendments list, so that I can do it on my screen, that would be amazing as well.
So are you wanting to make a sub-amendment, Trustee Milborn?
Yes, because I don't believe it's in there. Your amendment is there. I apologize, I can't see it. It probably is best to make a sub-amendment with the language to this particular amendment. Can we then come back to this section? Is the sub-amendment the addition of interviews, parent council, and communication? So if you wanted to make a sub-amendment, it would be to insert the language, interviews, council updates, and trusted communications at the end of the, well, this one.
All right, so the director has added the wording. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a sub-amendment. Is the sub-amendment friendly? Okay, that's friendly, and the amendment is friendly. That's carried. All right, on to the next one, please, Manager Guthrie.
Sorry, this is Amanda's. I'll let her introduce, but it is very similar to the language. Correct, Nancy. I was just going to say I'd be more than happy to remove mine as the language in the above question number plate for me.
Thank you, Trustee Presley. Next,
We have already addressed this one.
right?
Trustee Lyra's amendment is next with respect to clarification at 310B.
Go ahead, Trustee Evans.
So when I read the first paragraph, it just reads very, very difficultly, and it seems to imply that inexpensive awards to recognize service and accomplishments in civic charitable organizations, such as nominal gift cards, seems to be implying that nominal gift certificates are awards for charitable or educational or religious organizations. And so this is a clarification language to make it more clear what is intended.
Thank you. Trustee Evans, is this a friendly amendment? Just gonna give a moment for people who can't see the screen to see the screen. Is this friendly? All right, that's carried. Moving right along. We're on a roll here. Trustee Scott. Section 220.
And the amendment proposed is simply to add the word students to the list of people that that we deal with and are expected to treat respectfully and without abuse.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. Is this amendment friendly? It is. Carried. Next. Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Chair, through you. It was just a simple addition of language of immediate and brief and of correspondence and media social media to make it clear that we are opposing.
Thank you. Is this an amendment friendly? It is carried. Next. Trustee Scott. 323.
Yeah, this one just didn't seem to be quite hitting the mark in the original wording. Because it was sort of typical. So this, I propose, as a better way to say it without changing the meaning.
Is this friendly? Here as it is. Carried. Lynn, Trustee Scott, sorry. That's 3.37.
Based on past experience with dealing with code of conduct investigations, I think it's important to include an expectation that the response to integrity commissioner requests will be provided in a timely manner. It would be up to the integrity commissioner to figure out what was expected by way of timely, but I think we can't afford to have people dragging things out unnecessarily.
Thank you for that. Trustee Evans.
I have a question.
I mean, I guess. Sorry, is this friendly or clarification?
Clarification.
All right, go ahead, please.
Who determines what timely manner is and what was the mover thinking?
Trustee Scott.
That would be at the discretion of the integrity commissioner. Every investigation, every review is going to be somewhat different. And the circumstances of the people involved are going to be somewhat different. So I think that it has to be judged on a situational basis, and the person who is managing the process should be the one who makes the decision.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. Trustee Evans, is that
How
adequately-
staff have interpreted it as well?
beg your pardon?
Is that how staff have interpreted it as well?
Thank you, Director Giroux.
Yes.
Thank you, Director Giroux.
Mrs.
Trustee
Brendley.
Evans? Friendly on everybody else's behalf. All right, moving along. 4.1, Trustee Scott.
Simply a clarification because student trustees are not board members. So it is important to make the tiny shift in language that makes it clear that we're talking about board members and we're talking about student trustees.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. Is this friendly? It is. That's carried. Next. 4.9, Trustee Milborn.
Intention of, the intention of this amendment is just to emphasize that where possible, the code of conduct review should remain confidential.
All right, thank you. Is this friendly? Trustee Aziz?
Can you hear me? If I could propose a sub-amendment, Trustee Alberta, to remove where possible, because I think that might be implied, there's no confidentiality unless staff has other recommendations. Leaving the where possible might be implication about the application of measures of confidentiality, but open to discussion. I need to come closer. Did anybody hear what I said? No, maybe not. Okay, just to reiterate, I was proposing a sub-amendment to remove where possible, that it might leave, interpretation of the opportunity for confidentiality, which should be mentioned at all times during the, deliberation.
All right, thank you. Is that a friendly sub-amendment? Trustee Dixon?
Trustee Dixon, we can't hear you. We can't hear you as well. Yeah. Just a bit of a clarification. When we're talking about confidentiality, because with code of conduct, it's formal and informal, right? So where's the confidentiality being the formal? I just want a little bit more clarification. I just want a little bit more clarification on that point. So my understanding of 4.9 is it says the integrity commission will work with the chair and director when providing advice. So if board members are coming to the chair and director or the chair and director.
So Trustee Aziz, if I may,
Please.
interrupt you for a moment, I apologize. I'm gonna look to the executive officer to respond.
Sure.
Executive officer.
Through you, Chair, the intent of 4.9 in terms of the integrity commissioner, working with the chair and director when providing advice to board members isn't necessarily in the context of them, investigating, potential breach or a complaint, but rather maybe circumstances where an individual board member has gone to the, integrity commissioner and has sought their advice, in advance, for example, of taking a particular action or on a matter related to the code. And so it's not necessarily limited to circumstances where the information might otherwise be shared. I believe in my discussions with the mover that the concern is that in seeking advice, board members may be disclosing information which they view as confidential, and that the intention of the amendment is to protect the confidentiality that's disclosed in the context of seeking advice. And I think that where possible is in anticipation that there may be circumstances where either in the course of clarifying the advice or perhaps at a later time when it's necessary to confirm that the advice was obtained, it may not be possible, for example, to maintain the confidentiality. So I don't want to put words in the mover's mouth, but we did have an email exchange about that earlier today.
Great, thank you for that, executive officer. So did you still want to do your amendment? A sub-amendment?
If I may ask the mover for clarification about where possible, mentioning the correspondence to the executive officer reported and the mover about adding a possible English language. We will go to 90.
Go ahead, trustee Melbourne.
So as the executive officer said, the reason that we're possible is if there is a reason to say publicly, like how many people of the vice integrity commissioner has given, for example, I don't want to restrict staff from not being able to report back to the public and they chose that kind of information.
I will remove my. I'll remove my sub-amendment. Thank you.
Thank you for that, trustee Aziz. Trustee Presley.
Question to the mover, would it be friendly to ask if we were to change the wording, to when possible as opposed to where possible, or is that just?
I feel the difference between the word shall and may coming around. Go ahead, trustee Melbourne.
Can change it to when, right? No, it's fine. I'll resign.
All right, thank you for that. So now that we've had the discussion, is this at the end of the day a friendly amendment? All right, thank you, colleagues. Next,
Trustee Scott, seeking clarification on some points.
go ahead, trustee Scott, please.
It's more than just clarification, Madam Chair. It could also lead to some amendments in the policy. Because what I was looking at was the connections between sections 4.10, 4.11, and 4.21. The first one, 4.10, talks about filing a complaint, which is fine. And my assumption has always been that that would be a complaint that was filed in writing, either by email or by letter. But then in the next section 4.11, it talks about in writing and must include, and then sets out a number of parts that are expected to be included. And if that is expected for all complaints, whether you're looking at a potentially informal process or whether you're looking potentially at a formal process, I think it needs to be clear that in writing applies to any complaint. And that is sort of there. But I think it might maybe need the word all complaints filed with the integrity commissioner in 4.11, because there has been some confusion in the past about process as to whether or not it could be just a little quick email to the person acting as integrity advisor, or whether you needed or a little quick email to the chair, which wouldn't necessarily include all of the elements that are listed in 4.11. So I think that the first amendment that I would make based on the staff responses would be to add the word all at the beginning of 4.11.
Would you like a comment from the executive officer first? Trustee Scott, is that okay? Go ahead, executive officer.
Through you, Chair, the comment I was going to make was just with respect to the requirement that complaints be written, and that is built into the definition of complaints that's included in the definitions. In terms of the proposed amendment, I think, again, if the mover feels that it would be clearer and to add the term all, then I don't think we have any concerns about that. I think the all was to some extent implied, but certainly it is.
All right, trustee Scott, would you like to make the amendment?
Yes, I would like to make the amendment to insert all at the beginning of 4.1.
Right, thank you for that. Is that amendment friendly? It is, and it's carried. Thank you. Next.
So the next challenge then happens when we move on to look at the language in 4.21, which says that the integrity commissioner shall provide to the chair a confidential copy of the complaint within 10 days of receiving it or determining that the complaint will be managed by the formal process following the failure of an informal process. And so again, here, is the chair going to be informed of all complaints, whether they are going through an informal process and maybe get resolved there, or whether they end up going through a formal process within 10 days of receiving the complaint? I think that's the big question, is how many complaints are forwarded to the chair and at what point? Because if an informal, if a appeal is dealt with informal, does the chair get informed? That's not good.
Thank you, trustee Scott, executive officer.
Through you, Chair, the intention is certainly that it's complaints that are intended to be processed through the formal process in this case. I think in terms of the original wording, we were contemplating that there may be matters that may be brought to, or that may be raised and some efforts made to resolve them before the complaint is brought to the attention of the integrity commissioner, in which case it would be receiving it. However, I don't think the proposed amendment changes the intention, and in some respects may clarify that it's at the point of determining that it will be managed through the formal process and not necessarily when it's initially received.
If I may, Madam Chair, I think we had this conversation in the original draft, and I think there's a difference in practice and in the language of the policy in terms of where people understood informal. And so the complaint is actually supposed to be in writing in all cases. The review process is informal, and that's what the language and the last amendment actually clarifies. And so in this case, I think the section is, as executive officer noted, under the formal review process. But it is, and the last amendment helps to clarify that difference with maybe one practice.
So the question I still have is whether the chair will be informed of all complaints, or whether the chair will only be informed of complaints that are going to be managed through the formal review process.
Executive officer.
Right, so through you, Chair, is the trustee asking in terms of the original language what the intention was?
No, I'm looking at the language that is proposed in 4.21 in the draft. Do we mean what exactly is going to be provided to the chair? And if it's only the complaints that are going to be going through a formal review process, it should state that clearly.
And I believe that is the intention, that it would only be those that are being directed to the formal review process.
In that case, what I would suggest is that we reword that section to state the integrity commissioner shall provide to the chair a confidential copy of the complaint within 10 brackets numeral 10 days of a determination that the complaint will be managed through the formal review process following the failure of an informal review process. And that gets rid of the receiving.
Thank you, trustee Scott. This is a friendly amendment. It is carried. Next. 4.22, trustee Scott.
Yes. Sometimes when things go wrong among trustees or between trustees and families or members of the public, these things hit the media with them. And I think that the confidentiality piece of the processes and the complaints is extremely important. But I do think that particularly if there is not going to be a general circulation of complaints quickly to anyone other than the chair, I think that at the discretion of the integrity commissioner, all board members shall be informed at least of the existence of a complaint, so that you don't have 25 trustees, not that there are 25, but trying to all make complaints about the same thing at the same time or at slightly different times. So I would think that would only happen if the incident that precipitated the complaint has been a topic of broad public discussion, comment, or criticism. But I do think that there should be an opportunity for trustees to be informed in confidence that with regard to whatever the incident was, a complaint has been received.
Thank you, Trustee Scott, Trustee Evans.
My apologies. So I approve of this in principle. I just think that sentence should end a little bit sooner than it does. I don't think we need to specify only in the case there's been a broad topic of public discussion, comment, or criticism. I think we can just trust the discretion of the integrity commissioner. Maybe there was only an event that 6 trustees witnessed and they expect to get 6 code of conduct complaints and they could head that off. I think we can remove everything after the word process.
Is that a sub amendment?
That is a sub amendment, yes.
It's a sub amendment friendly. All right. It appears to be friendly. Thank you. That's carried. All right. Is the amendment friendly? It is carried. Next. 4.34, Trustee Scott. Trustee Scott, we can't
Sorry.
hear you.
Sorry, another new section to follow section 4.33. And which would mean it would receive 4.31. And this would be a new section, and again arising from past experience with code of conduct complaints and formal processes. To add this section, board members other than the complainant or the respondent who have in advance of the board's debate on the matter published their personal determinations as to whether a breach has occurred or what sanctions should be imposed shall be asked to recuse themselves from voting on it.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. Trustee Evans.
This is not friendly.
All right, it's not friendly. I'll start a speaker's list.
May I have introduction?
You certainly can, Trustee Scott.
Thank you. The problem here is that in any matter which is in some ways a quasi legal proceeding subject to appeal and potentially to judicial review, as has happened in many other boards, when you are engaged in adjudicating something and have already expressed bias on the subject, you should not be voting on the decision. It's as simple as that. So if there has been a public expression of bias, that means that the person who is adjudicating the matter is not objective, is not able to be objective, or certainly is perceived as not being and therefore should be asked to recuse.
Thank you, trustee Scott. Now I will go to my speaker list. Trustee Evans, please.
So I am a longtime believer in silence continues to harm the victim. And I don't necessarily want to prevent trustees who have witnessed harm from saying anything about that harm, particularly when it's harm to a community. And I think this is too broad. I think that this is going to be interpreted as anyone who's commented on anything related to a specific piece. I think we're better off with the system we have now, where individuals can say, I think I have, or I think I have not, predetermined, prejudged. And so I will be voting against this.
Thank you, trustee Evans. Trustee Kaplan, please.
So my concern with this is more a question maybe for the executive officer than a concern, but why is the complainant allowed to vote in situations of court of conduct? If we're saying that that neither the complainant nor the person who is really complained about should be able to voice an opinion, because of course the complainant is also biased. So I guess I don't understand why the complainant is allowed to vote at all, which is beyond what you're saying to be able to vote. If other members of the board were to express an opinion that they should not be allowed to vote, why should we allow the complainant to vote?
Executive officer.
Through you, Chair, I was just checking to see if there was something specific in either the legislation or the regulation that addressed it. So if it is within a minute, I will check that out and then come back to it.
All right. Trustee Kaplan.
Yeah, that might also be a question that our legal counsel could answer, because this is a question of refusal and so on. This is, if we're talking about this is still a different process, which then we need clarification as to where are we pretending that this is like a legal process, and where are we acting as though this is something that is very clear, not a legal process.
I said it was a legal process, but what was said is that the process is subject to judicial review, and in fact, there are trustees within the province of Ontario who have taken their cases to the court. General Counsel Sinclair, are you in a position to answer this, or would you prefer that Executive Officer McCoy be given the time to answer it, as we've been working? Thank you for that. And Director Giroux.
Madam Chair, while they are thinking on that, I think it's important to recognize that this asks for recusal, but it won't require recusal, right? And so that's an important distinction members should have.
Good point, Director. So with that in mind, Trustee Kaplan. I think that's a good idea, but I do hope that members of the board, members of the committee did hear what the director had to say without the word. Thank you.
So I'm going to respectfully request that when people are speaking, that they lean in to their microphones so that there's a better chance that everyone will be heard. So, Executive Officer, do you have any news for us?
So through you, Chair, a couple of things is first, in terms of the question that Trustee Kaplan-Murphy asked with regard to the exclusion of the complainant. the legislation specifically precludes the subject matter of the complaint or the respondent from participating in any votes related to either the determination of the breach or if there is a breach, the sanctions. However, is silent with respect to the complainant. We also looked at the OPSPA template, which was sort of the initial policy that was prepared, and it too only refers to the respondent being precluded. So there is nothing at law specifically in the legislation to preclude the complainant from participating. However, as is the case with all votes, if the complainant felt that they did not wish to participate, then they could certainly volunteer to recuse themselves or to abstain from the vote. With regard to the amendment that's on the floor, we've had an opportunity to discuss, and I guess a couple of things. I guess the first is that that recusing should always be voluntary as opposed to mandatory, which I think is contemplated by the wording. Although it does leave the question in terms of, who will be asking the question and what the implications might be if the answer is that the person doesn't recuse themselves. So we considered some other alternative language if the committee wishes to address this particular issue through a new provision. And I think what it goes to is are cases where there may be a reasonable apprehension of bias based on prior public statements by a trustee. And so the language could read something like where there is a reasonable apprehension of bias based on prior public comments, a board member should consider recusing themselves from participating in the vote on the matter, or similar language.
Trustee Scott, do you have on that? Would you be comfortable?
I appreciate the proposed alternative wording and would be happy to withdraw my proposed amendment in favor of moving the language that Executive Officer has just read.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And I'll turn back to Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Trustee Kaplan-Murth, do you have any further questions?
So I guess my question is, to what end are we saying that somebody can voluntarily recuse themselves if it is another trustee who has expressed support or the opposite of support, and they're given the option of recusing themselves or not? Why does this even need to be in the legislation? Because essentially anybody can always abstain from voting. So what are we adding here?
Executive Officer, McCoy. I said Giroux for 12 years, so it's been a bit of a
Old habits, I understand,
Yes,
Chair.
yes.
So I would defer to the mover as well, but my understanding is that the intent of this is to raise the prospect that a trustee, perhaps other than the complainant or the respondent, have made prior public comments before the matter comes before the board, which could lead to an apprehension of bias. And in that case, what this would do is put forward at least an obligation to consider whether or not they should recuse themselves. In the event that they do not, then it may become a matter that is raised, for example, on judicial review or through some other process. But it is intended to at least flag the possibility that there is a reasonable apprehension of bias on the part of a board member.
Thank you, Executive Officer McCoy. I think you've, in my opinion, provided a very good rationale. And I turn to Trustee Scott, if she would further like to add her rationale to why she's wanting this to happen.
First, I believe that in the language that Ms. McCoy read out, she just said to recuse themselves, and I don't think she included the last words from voting on the matter. I think it was just to recuse themselves. Am I correct?
I think I initially said from participating on votes related to the matter.
And I think recusal usually would mean a refraining from participating. Is that correct? So I think I would strike the last 4 words from voting on the matter.
Is that the sub amendment friendly?
No.
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so. All right, we'll debate the sub amendment. So that's that list. A list for the sub amendment. Okay, so it's not friendly. So is somebody going to indicate why it's not friendly?
Okay.
All right, Trustee Kaplan Murphy.
So it's not that it's any better or any worse than the paragraph that was written before, but it is still a meaningless addition in a context in which unless we specify that there is a process for bringing to the attention of the integrity commissioner that there is somebody who has been specifically biased towards a trustee, and therefore the integrity commissioner is able to gauge whether or not people should be asked to recuse themselves. There is no reason to believe in a toxic situation that people who are themselves problematic are going to then identify themselves as perhaps being somebody who should be recusing themselves. So what are we adding here? Nothing. We've created a situation through the code of conduct process in which people can be vexatious, they can make accusations, they can be biased, and then they can decide whether or not to recuse themselves if they have emboldened others to move forward with a code of conduct.
Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My objective is to include a clause like this so that trustees in reviewing the policy, in being aware of the content of the policy, also are aware that this is something they may need to, or may wish to consider. It is a means of protecting the board against the potential expense, both in person hours and in money and legal fees, of having to go through a potential judicial review of a decision that someone decided was a biased decision on the part of the board.
Thank you for that. Do I have any further comments on the sub amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those. Oh. I apologize, Trustee Lyra. I cannot see you, but I have been informed you would like to speak. Go ahead, Trustee Evans.
So I think the second paragraph is worse than the first paragraph because you've lost a matter on the item. At this point, it's now just an apprehension of bias in general and not just a comment on the item at hand. I think, given the political nature of trustees and the disagreements trustees sometimes have in public forums like board meetings, that I wouldn't want the second paragraph, because at that point, a trustee could look back at any decision where 2 trustees have disagreed and say, that person is biased because of this decision that was made 2.5 years ago. I think without it being specifically linked, like the bias being specifically linked or the commentary being specifically linked to the action item, this second paragraph is much too broad compared to the first.
So Trustee Evans, are you speaking to the sub amendment?
My understanding is that we had an amendment on the floor, which was the board members other than new clause. And then the sub amendment is to replace it with the second paragraph.
No, we're adding matter.
Can you explain what happened to the amendment on the floor then? Because we've got an amendment and a
We're
sub-amendment.
we're gonna go back to it after we deal with the sub-amendment. No, oh, sorry, go ahead, trustee Scott.
The original proposed amendment was
Oh,
withdrawn
yeah,
without objection. And the language of this new version is the language that was provided by Executive Officer McCoy. And subsequently, I proposed to remove the reference to from voting on the matter. And if that, and that is what is on the floor at present.
It should not have been withdrawn without objection. I have no problem with removing the 5 words. My concern is about the second paragraph versus the first.
It was withdrawn without objection.
I see.
so we will be voting on the new paragraph. But we're dealing with a sub-amendment. All right. To the sub-amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor of this amendment. You want it? Opposed?
Can you clarify, please, what it is that we're talking about? Are we talking about from voting on the matter being added to this, being subtracted from this, the paragraph above it?
Removed.
Sorry, Chair, to clarify, so it's simply on the 5 words, correct?
That is
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna start this over. All those in favor of the sub-amendment. Opposed? Abstentions? That is carried. Back to the main amendment. I believe. I'm going to move on to trustee Milborn, please.
My question has been asked and answered.
Thank you. Moving along to trustee Aziz, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm concerned with the amendment on the floor because I'm in favor of allowing people to change their mind during processes such as code of conduct. While I understand that when someone is upset or discontent with whatever conversations happen between board members, they might go online and publish just colorful comments. I think after people have cooled down, have heard conversations, et cetera, they can act and remedy themselves in an appropriate manner. People come from all backgrounds to the board and are able to put their biases aside to make decisions for their communities and for our students. So I think I understand that asking is a key component here, but people might change their mind and throughout the process cool down. And I think all of us are able to act appropriately as adults when dealing with matters of code of conduct, code of conduct complaints, and remove personal bias to and uphold the integrity of the board. So I will not be voting for the amendment on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for that, trustee Aziz. I now turn to Ms. Miller.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I definitely don't support this in the way that I understand how in some cases, you would want this amendment. But I'm thinking in specific
instances of marginalized communities where there was potentially at least 2 trustees that could have been elected who were very openly anti-trans, residential school denier, racist people who have no problem saying things in public. So the problem is like Lyra was saying, silence is it's harmful. So I'm just thinking, I'm proactively thinking of a time when these groups who are organizing to become trustees, how when they do say these harmful things and it's met with silence. And that's where I'm thinking. How are you protecting those families and those kids saying, no, that's not okay? Are you not allowed to say that? You will be biased because I hope, on matters like that. So that's what I read when I read that.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Do we have any other comments? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just recalling, and thank you, Ms. Miller, for that, your thoughts on that. But I'm recalling in one of our trustee orientations where Suzanne gave it the example of the city councilors where they were voting and there was bias before the vote. So the vote ended up being unfair in a way, even though the end result was correct perhaps, but there was a lot of bias discussion before the actual vote. So if we could, consider that scenario in our thoughts.
Thank you. Do I have any other, trustee Lee, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In order to clarify some of the discussion that's had around, I propose a sub-amendment to add on the matter after the words public comments. So this sub-amendment would limit the idea behind the reasonable apprehension of bias being limited only to the subject of the code of conduct complaint and not, as trustee Evans mentioned, on other aspects of our work.
Thank you, trustee Lee. Is this sub-amendment friendly? It is not. Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you, through you. So echoing what Lily Miller has just said, we can't ask that trustees be silent on any matter. It is our roles as elected officials to speak up, and part of that is to be upstanding citizens, which includes calling out racism, colonialism, sexism, and so on. So if we are witnessing behavior of a fellow trustee or anybody in the, in the board, in the community, if we witness behavior and we call it out, we are exercising our freedom to politically speak on behalf of our constituents, and we are exercising our freedom to express our own dissatisfaction with behavior. So we can't be silent if in a situation where we're saying, well, there's bias during a voting process, there's also bias prior to a code of conduct being issued. There is always bias. We are political beings, and we are here to represent the issues that matter to us and to our constituents. So if we can't say that something that transpires is inappropriate, and we can't show our solidarity with our fellow trustees, then what are we doing here?
I appreciate on the matter. Executive Officer McCoy.
I'm sorry, I don't appreciate the comment. I'd like you to take that back, please. That wasn't my personal opinion. We're all giving our responses to this. This isn't a personal opinion. I'm expressing my concerns about the wording in this situation.
And thank you. But we all have different points of on things. I just demoted you, Executive Officer McCoy. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify that where there may be a reasonable apprehension of bias based on comments that a board member has previously made, and therefore a duty on them to recuse themselves exists whether or not the language is in the policy, and could become an issue that is ultimately determined, as I said earlier, on judicial review. And so I think, again, the real effect of having something like this clause in the policy is really, and I'll borrow a phrase that General Counsel used, is a signpost or a reminder to trustees with regard to the obligation, but exists whether or not there is wording in the policy to this effect.
Thank you, Executive Officer McCoy. So I'm continuing with my list, but even though I'm the chair, I'm going to weigh in on this as a first-time speaker. So I'm going to ask Trustee Jenikins to take the chair.
Will do.
So I will be supporting this. And I appreciate the comments that Lily Miller has made and that Trustee Kaplan Mirth has made. And Ms. Miller is right. There are people on the far right who are continuing to organize to win seats at this table. And that is very concerning. And but however, when it comes to a code of conduct complaint, we need to be prudent. We need to be prudent governors. We need to practice good governance to protect the board and the liability of the board. We need to engage in risk management. As Trustee Scott has alluded to, this could cost a lot of money, damage the reputation of the board. When there is a code of conduct complaint, the board, in fact, does become a quasi jury. Now, we know that in this system, when there's a jury, they are required not to prejudge the case. They're to listen to the case and make a decision. This has nothing to do, for me, in my opinion, about my very strong views about protecting the most vulnerable members of our community. This is about good governance. This is about being good governors. This is, in my opinion, part of our fiduciary responsibility. I think it's prudent to have it in there that trustees should avoid commenting on specific code of conduct complaints, not stopping from sharing how they feel about equity or how they feel about hate speech, et cetera, et cetera. To me, these are two different things. Again, we can have a difference of opinion without trying to cancel each other out and having bad feelings about one another. Thank you.
Back to you, Chair.
All right. And now I'll turn to Trustee Jenikins.
Well, I just wanted clarity. I guess the question is, we want to remain unbiased until that point of voting. So we can acknowledge trustee Kaplan-Meister's concerns about hearing the public's views, Ms. Miller's concerns about racism and everything else out there. But I guess the point is, we must remain unbiased till that point of our vote. So we can acknowledge, I acknowledge you, Ms. Miller, I acknowledge you, trustee Kaplan-Meister, but I'm not going to give you my response until I actually vote. So I think we need to remain, the key is to remain unbiased while acknowledging everyone and their concerns until that time of vote. And then we show what we think at that time.
Thank you. I believe I'm now turning to trustee Evans.
We are on the sub-amendment, yes?
Yes.
Okay. I think this is better with the sub-amendment than without it because it narrows the scope from any apprehension of bias in the past to an apprehension of bias on the matter. So I will be supporting the sub-amendment and continuing not to support the amendment in general.
Thank you, trustee Evans. Trustee,
This is just a question of clarification. So if a trustee is asked to recuse themselves and does not recuse themselves, what are the consequences?
executive officer.
Through you, Chair, there is no obligation. It's a voluntary decision that would be made by board members.
Is that answer satisfactory? And is that all? Thank you, trustee Milborn. Trustee Scott.
Thank you. I will be supporting the sub-amendment. It's a good addition. It does indeed narrow the scope. And I think that the thing to remember is that when we're looking at these kinds of decisions, the objective is to the purpose of the exercise of going through the review is to make a decision as to whether or not something wrong happened. And if it did, what can we do about it to try to prevent it from happening again? And that really is the objective. If we want the decision to hold, then we need to make sure we have observed due process. And that means that it is important. It is not that you can't condemn racism, you can't condemn anti-Semitism. You absolutely can, but you can't say, I made my judgment about this person without hearing the evidence.
Thank you, trustee Scott. Are we ready to vote on the sub-amendment? It looks like we are. All those in favor of the sub-amendment, please raise. Yes. Trustee Bell?
Abstaining?
Oh. Thank you. We weren't sure. Okay. That carries. All right, back to the amendment. Are there further speakers to the? Trustee Aziz?
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo what Ms. Miller had mentioned earlier. I want to keep folks remembering that if someone is agrees to recusing themselves, it means one less vote on the matter at hand. It's I'm really worried about silencing voices and concerns. I understand that they're being asked to, but even then I'm thinking about situations where new trustees might be on the board. They might not know that they're being asked and it's voluntary, that they're still allowed to vote. There's a number of scenarios where, while I understand the intention of the mover and appreciate their concern for the integrity of the board, I'm truly worried about, future incidences and so forth. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Trustee Lee. Yes, sorry, trustee Evans, go ahead, please.
So the purpose, or one of the purposes of the code of conduct is to make sure that we maintain trust in our communities, that they trust that trustees are making good decisions and are being reasonable adult people. I worry that we will hurt that trust if we don't have the ability to, as Lily Miller has said, speak out when there are issues impacting our communities. I am not going to be supporting this amendment. I understand that the principle still applies regardless of whether or not we write it into place. But I think this is better left unwritten. Thank you.
It looks like I'm turning to trustee Scott for wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that the most important thing, and I'm glad that trustee Aziz raised this, is that this is not a requirement. It is a reminder of something that it behooves all of us to consider. And it does not shut down things that we might say with regard to general principles at all. That is not the problem here. The problem is making a judgment about an individual without hearing all of the evidence first. And if we want our board decisions to stick, that's important. In terms of new trustees who may not be familiar with the concept of recusal, this is something that would allow them to say, oh, I don't know what that's all about, and seek advice. And we certainly have plenty of people, including potentially an integrity commissioner, who would be able to provide good advice on that. So I hope that that my colleagues will support the addition of this, not because it requires an additional action necessarily on the part of individual board members, but because it ensures that they are knowledgeable in approaching a code of conduct review decision.
Thank you, trustee Scott. I'm now going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Sorry, did you get trustee Evans and trustee Bell? And I think everybody's voted. All right, that carries. Thank you. Next.
I think the next one is also mine, and that is an amendment to section 4.34. Since we have agreed on the addition of this new section, and considering the concept of a vote of at least 2/3 of the members of the board elected or appointed, we're 12 trustees. The person who is the respondent in a code of conduct complaint is not under the legislation allowed to vote on the matter. So that means that we need 2/3 of 11. If we have several people who do recuse themselves, that could reduce the number to the point where we didn't actually have 2/3 of the board members elected or appointed who were eligible to vote in the first place, which would seem to be sort of a ridiculous situation. So I think that it would be appropriate to say 2/3 of the members of the board elected or appointed who have not recused themselves and excluding the respondent. And that would allow a decision to be made even if several people did recuse.
So if I may, from the chair, I have a question of clarification to the executive officer. Would this possibly mean that a trustee could be sanctioned with less than half the board voting to do so?
In theory, that could be the outcome,
All right, well,
which could also be the case depending on which trustees are present.
all right, yes. For me, this is not friendly. To trustee Evans?
So I am not super fond of this amendment. One of the reasons that it was 2/3 elected or appointed to begin with is that there was a desire not just to have people skip that meeting and lower the threshold. I don't know if we want to find other ways to lower the threshold. We don't have any requirements on what it takes for somebody to recuse themselves. And so I don't know if we want to go back that route. At that point, why make it 2/3 of people elected or appointed, not to make it 2/3 of those voting and present? Because you can just recuse yourself and you don't need to justify a recusal. And at that point, you've lowered the threshold. And when it comes to sanctioning another trustee, we intentionally set a high bar. We intentionally said you need to prove to 2/3 of your colleagues, including yourself, that this is a behavior that the board will not tolerate. And I don't know if we want to go down the route of lowering that threshold in substantial ways. So I'm going to hear the rest of the debate, but I'm leaning against this.
Thank you, trustee Evans. What? Trustee Scott?
Just a point of clarification, I don't recall that the existing language says that it's a vote of 2/3 of those present. It's a vote of 2/3 of 12 minus 1. So that does not mean that we could be in a situation if people just didn't show up where we would be able to approve something with a small majority. The question is, if a number of people are disqualified either by themselves or for other reasons from voting, or unable or unwilling to attend, the question is, it would still have to count everybody, even if they weren't present, would count towards the 2/3. So you couldn't take whether or not you were present at the meeting as the reason. But if you are actually disqualified for one reason or another from voting, that would mean that if enough people were disqualified, we could have some really egregious behavior that occurred and be unable to impose any sanctions or to decide even whether anything wrong had happened.
Executive Officer McCoy.
Through you, Chair, Trustee Scott is correct, and I apologize. I think I did refer earlier to those present because we do have some circumstances where a 2/3 majority is counted based on those who are present and voting, and that is the language that is used in this circumstance in the OPSPA template that was originally developed. However, our policy has consistently said that it is 2/3 of those who are of the members in total, whether they are present and voting or not. So Trustee Scott is correct that mathematically, if we had, I think 2/3 of the 12 would be well, we would need 8 trustees voting one particular way in order to get a decision. And if we had, the respondent is not able to vote, and if we had 3 trustees or more who recuse themselves, then it would be impossible in that circumstance mathematically to reach the 2/3 majority threshold.
Madam Chair, if I may. I think that what the two conversations, when you put them together, speak to is that the board has a decision-making responsibility on the code of conduct issue. And so ultimately, the goal is not to have members recuse themselves so that they are able to participate. So you are actually making a decision about how high is the threshold for you to impose sanctions on a colleague. And you make that decision about the threshold, and then the idea about commenting on a case before it comes before you, or doing things that require you to consider recusal, means that you are then not able to participate in the decision-making process and potentially jeopardize the entire process. And when you think about the time, the financial costs, the public relations cost, and the legal implications, you don't want to find yourself in that position. So it's not so much about each individual step, but what you're trying to achieve in the process in its entirety that needs to be contemplated when you look at the amendments altogether.
Thank you, Director Giroux. Where was I? Are you done, Trustee Scott? All right, I'm moving along. Trustee Lee, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess in concert with what the director was saying, there's questions from me, at least, with regards to the recusal, and because we don't necessarily have to state why we're recusing ourselves. Am I correct? You could theoretically feel the need to recuse yourself and just say that without being explicit.
You can abstain.
Okay, so because basically the reason I'm on the fence on this one is exactly that. You've gone through all that time, and you could theoretically recuse yourself and remove and enough people recusing themselves. And I guess that's the same effect as abstaining, where you get below that 8 threshold. And that defeats the purpose of having to go through the whole process. So I guess that's the concern there with not setting a lower bar, if you want to call it that. So I don't know if you can comment on that aspect.
I think the decision is how high do you want the test to be for the application of sanctions, right? In the decision-making process, how high do you want the test to be? And then it's a question of managing your behavior through the process in order to be able to do that. And as much as I appreciate the comments and concerns raised earlier, the end goal of the process is to make a decision about whether there has been a breach and what sanctions will be applied, not to comment on the behavior before you get to the decision-making process, right? That's the goal. So the real question is, how high do you want the test to be? And then I think in terms of the language and the adjustment for not recusing or for recusing, it just adds to the complexity. I think your real question is, do you want a 2/3 test?
Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, please.
Thank you, and thank you for that clarification, Director Giroux. I think it's important that there is a very high bar for any decision that is made, particularly since there's a very low bar for anybody being able to put forward complaints. And I think the board has yet to, I believe I asked for a list of all of the previous complaints, but I would like to see a list of the previous complaints in the last 12 years to see how many of those ended up being vexatious, frivolous, or simply overturned because they had no merit. so I think it's very important for this to not be a big waste of resources and our time, for there to be a high bar. And if it's not 2/3 of the board voting, then it could be, as has been said, a very small number of people making a decision that is inappropriate. So we've already passed the idea that people can recuse themselves, but that should not then allow the board to proceed with voting where you have less than 2/3 of the board making that decision.
Thank you. Before I go to trustee Evans, I'd like to pass the chair to trustee Jenkins, so I may make a comment.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with trustee Evans and trustee Kaplan-Murphy. I think we need to remember, and I also am totally in favor of what the Director of Education has stated. The goal is always not to have to recuse yourself so you can participate in ensuring that members who breach the code of conduct are appropriately, with due process, sanctioned. But we have to keep in mind that one of the sanctions is potentially barring trustees from attending meetings, which basically is taking away the representation of the people that that trustee represents. That is very, very serious business, my friends. And so I think the bar needs to be set very high, and that it's incumbent on trustees while the code of conduct is going through to conduct themselves with prudence, I'm not denying free speech and speaking out against hatred. I'm always for that. But what I'm saying is a trustee should not put themselves in a position where they may think it's necessary to recuse themselves. Remember, we have not put a requirement on a trustee to recuse themselves. We must keep that in mind. So with that, I will.
Back to you, Chair.
All right, and now go back to trustee Evans, please.
Comments made.
Thank you. Do I have any further comments? I'll go to trustee Scott for wrap up.
None required.
Thank you, trustee Scott. I will now call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's the 12. I won't need to call for abstentions. All right, on to the next amendment, please.
Could you please let us know if that passed or failed?
Oh, sorry, trustee Evans, I apologize. It failed. On to trustee Presley, 4.56. Go ahead, trustee Presley.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, maybe staff could comment on this as well, because I found the wording a little bit ambiguous in my initial readings. My proposed amendment simply states that I don't feel that there should be a period barring a code of conduct complaint being made, regardless if it's an election year or not. I feel that if there's a valid reason to bring that complaint forward, that there should be no limitation imposed on that. And that's where my amendment seeks to remedy that issue.
May I have a staff comment, please?
Through you, Chair, we didn't propose any changes to that particular provision, but the proposed amendment, I think, is in line with the intent of the original wording. And perhaps, as trustee Presley indicated, it doesn't preclude a complaint from coming forward, but rather to some extent puts it on pause pending the outcome of the election, which I think is in line with the intent of the original wording.
So, man, question of clarification. So currently, if a trustee believes a trustee has breached the code of conduct, but we're during the campaign period, that code of conduct can be brought against the trustee in the event they are re-elected.
That's in line with the current language and I think is consistent with what's being proposed, but the language being proposed, I think, is somewhat clearer.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear. Is the intent of the mover to allow complaints to proceed even during the election period?
My intent, thank you for that, Director. My intent is to not restrict the time frame when a complaint, a valid complaint could be made. So in the original point, it states that who is seeking re-election shall not be a code of conduct complaint respecting a board member who is seeking re-election shall not be initiated. So to my understanding, to initiate a complaint, you must make it in formal writing, correct? And I don't believe that there should be any limitation in terms of dates when making that formal written complaint.
So you believe that formal complaints can be made during the election period?
A complaint can be brought up to the integrity commissioner. However, the review or the review of that complaint will not be administered until after the election and if that trustee in question has been reelected.
Okay, so just to clarify, if I
Sure.
may, so basically, what I hear you saying is you would like the integrity commissioner to be able to conduct the investigation, even though there's an election period, but that it would not be adjudicated till after.
No.
Okay.
Apologies for any confusion.
I think-
The intent of the amendment is to continue to have the option open to make a complaint, not to continue with the review of the complaint or any action required thereafter the written complaint itself. So let's say, for example, I want to submit a trustee complaint against Catherine Milburn. But we're in an election period, so I could then make that complaint, but the complaint will not be investigated or reviewed until after the election period. If that trustee is then reelected. If not reelected, then there would not be a point to doing so. Now, I'm open to any amendments, sub-amendments to that. I found the initial language a little bit confusing, so I can understand there might be some confusion there.
I think the
Executive officer.
I think the distinction is that the current language says that in an election year, a code of conduct complaint respecting a board member who is seeking re-election shall not be initiated. But then it goes on to say, if the board member who is the subject of the complaint is not re-elected, if there's no complaint initiated, there can't be a board member who is the subject of the complaint because no complaint can be initiated. So I think it's inconsistent in terms of the two sentences. I think what the trustee is attempting to do is to not preclude matters being dealt with at all because of an election period, but rather providing that, for lack of a better phrase, free zone, so that there are no complaints in the process of being reviewed or investigated between September 1 and the election. If the board member is elected, then the matter would resume following the election. If the board member is not elected, then no review would be undertaken. So I'm not sure that the current language or the proposed language necessarily gets to that specifically, but I think that's what the intent is, if I'm correct. I guess the current language is intended to do that, but I guess the issue is what happens to any complaint that may be initiated between September 1st and the election period for trustees who are seeking election. And I stand to be corrected by those who were more involved with the previous policy, but it looks like the intent was that it be paused and only resurrected if the member is reelected.
That is correct. Thank you.
just online, can you speak into your mic? Is that,
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that is the intent. Thank you, Executive Officer McCoy. I appreciate that.
all right, thank you, trustee Presley. Director Giroux. Did you have any comments?
I think the executive officer covered it.
Great, thank you. All right, question of clarification, because I'm gonna ask if this is friendly.
Yes, question of clarification.
All right, go ahead, trustee Aziz.
So based on the comments just made by Executive Officer McCoy regarding potential differentiations between the language proposed and the intention of the mover, could we ask staff, particularly Executive Officer McCoy, for a clarifying language to ensure that the intention of the mover of Trustee Presley is, if we could take like a 5-minute recess, if needed, to really solidify the intention of the mover in the proposed language.
Executive Officer, do you feel you need a recess?
I'm wondering if we add, during the period 1 September and ending after the first board meeting following the election, that the complaint shall not proceed pending the outcome of the election. If the board member who is the subject of the complaint is not reelected, no review shall be undertaken. Does that?
Does that clarify, Trustee Presley and Executive, like proceed meaning like it's paused, basically?
Yes, that would be the.
So could you go through the chair, please?
Sorry, Chair, through you, if I may ask, Executive Officer McCoy, and then, well, I guess Executive Officer McCoy put forth the language, but through you, Chair, to Trustee Presley, does that clarify the language to the intention you had originally had behind the original proposed amendment?
Thank you,
Trust-
Chair. Yep,
Trustee
sorry.
Presley, are you comfortable with what Executive Officer McCoy has proposed?
Through you, Chair. Yes, I am.
Okay. All right, then. If this is friendly. It looks like it is. That's carried. Thank you, Trustee Presley. Last one. 4.61, Trustee Scott, bring us home.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In this section, which is picking up on the recommendation that was made in the audit committee review of the policy, it seems to me all members of the board does not in fact include student trustees, and therefore it would be appropriate to add a sentence that we expect, since this policy applies to them, that all student trustees shall sign the board member code of conduct acknowledgement and undertaking, in their case, as soon as possible after the beginning of their term of office and following board approval of any revisions to the code of conduct during their term of office.
If I may, through you, Chair, I believe that the definition of board members, capital B, capital M board members, does in fact include student trustees.
It does. So from that point of view, this may or may not be necessary. I leave it to my colleagues to decide.
If I may, Madam Chair, the amendment that Trustee Scott has proposed still changes the language to the beginning of their term as opposed to sworn into office, and student trustees are not sworn into office. So the change reflects the start of the term for both elected and non-elected trustees.
Is this amendment friendly? Thank you. Is there further debate on this policy? Trustee Evans.
I have a question for staff about the enforceability of a clause I'd like to add based on discussions we had earlier. Is there any possibility that we can put in our policy that a trustee elect or a trustee candidate would also be required to sign the code of conduct, and failure to do so would result in a code violation upon their election? Looking to staff.
Executive Officer McCoy.
So I'm not sure what force or what measures we could take to compel a candidate to agree or acknowledge the code of conduct and to comply.
I think it would be failure to sign and uphold the code of conduct for the duration of their term in the election would be a violation of the code of conduct. And therefore, upon taking office, they would be subject to the applicable sections of the code.
I think the dilemma is the policy in its entirety applies to board members who are individuals who have been elected or appointed. And so they fall outside of the policy by definition.
Is that all, Trustee Evans?
I'm thinking.
Can I move on to Trustee Kaplan-Murth and come back to you?
Yes.
With your thoughts? Trustee Kaplan-Murth, please.
I didn't have anything to add. I was just pointing out before that,
Oh,
that
I'm
Chair
sorry,
Evans,
yes, and I-
Chair Lyra had her hand up.
I apologize. I thank you for that. Back to you, Trustee Evans.
There's not a lot of time to gather my thoughts. Okay, I'll come back to this later.
Trustee Jenkins.
So when a new trustee begins their term, let's say it's November 1st, when does the term end for the previous trustee who lost? Is it October 31st? So, I mean, the board is 12 members, so they're the ones that are, are being reviewed. So does it matter really for the trustee candidates because they're not officially a trustee?
I mean, I think Director Giroux was clear. I mean, there's no way to a conduct on candidates. Trustee Evans?
So, other boards around the province have initiated code of conduct complaints against trustees for things that were said and done during the campaign period before their term in office. There's a case, and I couldn't for the life of me remember where it is, where a trustee posted insensitive posts, I think they were racist, on Facebook, and was held accountable after they started office for those actions. As we heard earlier in this meeting, we have seen a growing number of candidates. I believe Trustee Blackburn said that they were far-right candidates who were seeking to gain access to a seat at this table, and have made comments in the election cycle that were clear violations of our existing policies, usually the human rights policy. My hope is that we could find a way to make sure that if a person campaigns on violations of the human rights policy and is elected, they are then held accountable under the code of conduct for their commentary that is a violation of the human rights code of conduct or policy and code of conduct policy. And I think giving people a heads up and being like, when you sign up, you are expected to sign this code of conduct and you are expected to uphold this code of conduct, and failure to do so upon election, if you win, will result in a code of conduct complaint. That was sort of the train of thought that I was working with. And my hope is that I can put together language to that effect before the board meeting, before this section of the board meeting. And if there are further comments on that train of thought, I'd like to hear them.
Director Giroux.
I appreciate the concerns that are raised in the attempt to get at it. And I'm cautious about proceeding too quickly on the spur of the moment. I think a couple of things. I think that Trustee Lyra's comments could be achieved in part. We have a practice in this organization of sending an information package to trustee candidates. And so we definitely could add information about the code of conduct in that package and clarify that that's an expectation on election. That doesn't get to the piece about discipline once elected, but given the complexity of that, I wonder if that's a question that we might hold for tonight and maybe put to the integrity commissioner, who will have some experience with the previous cases that have been studied and will have a better understanding and may be able to come back to us, recognizing that we do have most of the term of office to resolve this issue.
I think that's a very good suggestion, Director Giroux. Over to Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I would have to agree with both the statements of the chair and the director. I also would pose that it might be something to consider in developing a policy for candidates looking to run for election within the board, as opposed to trying to attach it to our current code of conduct.
Thank you for that. Anyone else comments on the policy in its entirety? Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about 4.54, and it has to do with the meeting may be closed to the public if the breach or alleged breach involves the security of the property of the board, et cetera, et cetera. My question is this: how do we define security of the property of the board? Would security of the property of the board include the protesters and harassers that we've been encountering of late? If they were to, for example, threaten the board's security by appearing if there is a public hearing of any sort.
Thank you for that. Executive Officer.
Through you, Chair, I'll start and perhaps invite General Counsel Sinclair to weigh in if he has anything to add. The items that are specifically set out in 4.54 are those items that are in the Education Act that are permissible to be considered in camera. So these grounds align directly with those things. In terms of the specific situation that the trustee raised, in the normal course, that would not fall within the parameters of paragraph A, the security of the property of the board. But again, I'll look to General Counsel Sinclair to see if he would like to correct me on that or weigh in.
I think what the executive officer has said is accurate. There is plenty of case law, or at least decisions from the Ontario Ombudsman's office on the meaning of those provisions of closed meetings provisions. And those provisions wouldn't contemplate what the trustee is asking about. And ultimately, it's a decision of the chair based on a review of the statute. So I think that's accurate. I don't think it would apply to the circumstance.
Thank you to both of you. Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, do you have anything further?
So just for clarification, so it wasn't something that the legislators who wrote this had in mind, but it was also written in a time when we weren't experiencing what we're currently experiencing. And so the question remains, can we add to this or amend the policy to say that security of the property of the board includes concerns about security and safety of the conduct of the board in light of possible harassment? Or is that something that cannot be rethought, given our current climate.
I don't think it's in our purview to rethink that because these are the legislative provisions. But recognizing that, there is draft legislation that relates to code of conduct and, there is the potential to, ask the ministry to consider that, particularly if there are going to be regulations or other pieces of consultation around this. So to explain that that part could be rethought.
Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you. Those answer my questions.
Thank you. Trustee Scott.
Just a further note on that. I think there's a difference between closed to the public and not having the public physically present. Because in the situation where there is physical danger to the members of the board, the staff, or others who are involved in a board meeting or committee meeting, the meeting still may need to be public, but that doesn't mean it has to have everybody physically in attendance as long as the public is able to observe and hear what is happening in the meeting. Whereas with the language that's in section 4.54, that really applies to the subject matter of the meeting, rather than to the physical circumstances of the meeting. And I'm sure that Executive Officer McCoy would be able to correct me if I've said that anything incorrectly.
Through you, Chair, I think Trustee Scott is correct in terms of the difference between a closed meeting where the subject matter is can properly be discussed without the public present or having access. I think there is also perhaps some question as to whether or as to what constitutes a public meeting that we are still considering and grappling with in terms of whether there is a requirement that it includes access, or rather what access needs to be provided to the public in order to meet the obligation to have a public meeting. So that's the only clarification that perhaps I would make with regards to those comments.
Is that all, Trustee Scott? Miss Lyon?
Thank you, Chair, Trustee Blackburn. I would like to put forward the idea that there is value in having meetings open to the public, to an in-person presence of members of the community that maybe are hard to quantify, but there is a value in being at meetings in person. So I would want perhaps through you, Chair, Ms. McCoy, to look at what would be the impact of shutting the public out, because in my perspective and on behalf of the Parent Involvement Committee, I don't believe that following along online is as effective in terms of engagement as being at a meeting in person. Thank you.
Executive Officer McCoy.
Through you, Chair, and I think that's exactly the kinds of considerations that we are undertaking right now in terms of what does it mean to hold a public meeting and to meet the obligations under the Act that the meeting be open, and does it in all circumstances mean that in general we know that it has in the past meant that members of the public are able to actually attend in person and not just virtually. And so whether or not that is the standard is something that we are considering, but certainly as we know that has been the default based on our practice.
Thank you. Trustee Aziz, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I want to thank Trustee Kaplan-Murphy and Ms. Lyon for their comments. I completely appreciate that the importance of public meetings that are accessible in person is important. And as value to community conversations. However, in understanding some of the heightened concerns regarding harassment and the safety of our, not just the board members, but also our staff. I understand that we are working, our staff is working behind the scenes and developing concrete ongoing procedures to maintain the safety of our staff and board members. And I'm wondering if that's, if I may ask staff, if we will receive an update on the longevity of the safety measures being put forth, if it will become a regular practice. I understand we have a sign-in for members who are attending. We've got some ribbon that is protecting us today, but you know, we discussed this a little bit further back, but I'm wondering if Director Giroux or others have a timeline for when the board will see either concrete procedures or policies on this being a regular practice.
So I think we've kind of deviated off like the policy of the code of conduct. So I think your questions are valid questions, but I think we need to go back to the code of conduct. Is there anyone else who has a comment about the code of conduct policy? Then to Trustee Lee for wrap up.
No further comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. All right. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Trustee Bell in favor.
And that's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. All right, I think it's time to call a 10-minute All right, I'd like to call us back to order, please.
Yes.
All right, I will now call for a mover to receive the report of February 22nd, 2023, the Parent Involvement Committee. Trustee Nash, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Thank you. I will now call for a mover to receive the report of March 1st, 2023 Special Education Advisory Committee. Trustee Dixon, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Thank you. I will now call for a mover to receive the report of March 23, 2023 Indigenous Education Council. Trustee Presley, are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Thank you. I will now call for a mover to receive the report of March 30, 2023 Advisory Committee on Equity. Trustee Dixon, are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? I will now call for a mover to receive the report of April 12th, 2023, the Audit Committee. Trustee Scott,
Move receipt.
thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried.
And I should note, Madam Chair, that there is one recommendation in that report which was addressed in the staff written revisions of the Code of Conduct policy.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. I will now turn to Director Giroux to introduce the draft strategic plan. And I'd like to note that we have quite a bit left of the agenda, so we're going to attempt my colleagues to be as efficient as possible for the remainder of the meeting. Thank you. Director Giroux.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And just to follow up on the chair's comments, we are very excited to bring you the draft strategic plan report. We are also very excited to bring you the update on student achievement report tonight. And we've got a talented group of folks waiting for that. So hopefully we can balance our time. So first, my appreciation to this committee for helping us to be in this position to bring you forward this draft plan. This year, we changed the process for the strategic planning reporting, and we've been reporting more regularly to committee. We've also been doing the same with the Directors Coordinating Council, and that change has been very valuable to have the input as we work through the process. And been really helpful also to have the input from the advisory committees and the toolkit and the template they provided. And so I say that because there's been several ways that your input has been coming into this process, in addition to the very valuable time the seniors team and board spent together. And those conversations were richly informed by the public feedback. It's nice to see a draft before us tonight that's so reflective of that. My thanks to Andrea Rahim, who's going to lead us through the presentation, to Stacey Kay, who's been supporting her, and the many other staff who've been supporting the process. A reminder that this is a draft. This draft is built on 3 priorities: learning, well-being, and social responsibility. I think those 3 priority areas really reflect what we heard from the community and what we heard from our advisory committees and you in our conversation. In terms of format and layout, it's completely a draft. We didn't want to go too far down the design path before we had a chance to talk about the content. And we'll have an opportunity tonight to get your feedback, but also want you to know that you are still welcome to provide comments to Andrea. We do have a public meeting next week where we're going to share the draft, and we're still in the comment stage. And Andrea will also share with the committee members an electronic version that you can collaborate and provide comments on as well. So just to let you know, there are multiple ways for your engagement. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrea to quickly walk us through.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Over to you, Dr. Rahim.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So as mentioned this year, there have been a number of initiatives and events that have helped shape the development of the draft strategic plan for 2023 to 2027. I want to echo Director Giroux's comments and acknowledge the leadership of the board and the advisory committees in really getting us through this process to bring the draft before you tonight. We completed and shared an environmental scan and conducted extensive consultation where we gathered insights from the community on how we can support student learning and well-being. And the new strategic plan follows naturally from the implementation of the 2019 to 2023 strategic plan and really leverages what we've learned over the past 4 years as we worked to build a culture of innovation, caring, and social responsibility. And so with thoughtful reflection, the Board of Trustees and the senior team have engaged in multiple discussions, which have shaped the mission, values, and priorities for the next strategic plan. So a mission statement is intended to answer the question, what do we do and who do we do it for? So our draft mission statement is to provide students with equitable opportunities to realize their potential and develop into thoughtful, innovative, and knowledgeable community members who contribute to their society. Our values show what we stand for. The values we've drafted are equity, diversity, and inclusion, collaboration and community building, effective use of resources, and empowerment, continuous learning, and governance. These are outlined in the report and embedded in the priorities and key work that you see in the appendix. So as we worked through the development of our new strategic plan, one of the things that stood out for me was how often as a group, we found ourselves collaboratively reflecting on the strengths of the current strategic plan and components from it that should be carried forward. So the plan evolved to focus on 3 key interconnected areas of learning, well-being, and social responsibility. Under learning, the desired outcomes we identified were improved student literacy and achievement in math, and improved program quality and accessibility. Under well-being, we are working toward improved student mental health resources and supports, enhanced safety for students and staff, and increased staff morale and well-being. And under social responsibility, we have identified progress toward reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, strengthened leadership through equitable and ethical decision-making, and enhanced environmental sustainability. So the document attached as Appendix A outlines the mission, values, areas of focus, and desired outcomes. And it also includes plans for measurement and the impact that we hope to see. As Director Giroux mentioned, this is a working copy. So over the next month, we'll be seeking feedback. This is not intended to be the final design. Once the content is finalized, the strategic plan will be designed, branded, and shared with the board for final approval in June. To gather feedback on the draft strategic plan, we're hosting a strategic planning open house next Monday, May 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Ottawa Technical Secondary School. We are also providing advisory committees with a toolkit for discussion at their next meeting. This toolkit includes both an electronic Jamboard for overarching comments on the concepts and ideas, as well as a Google Doc for specific and detailed comments on content. And as Director Giroux mentioned, we are going to be sharing a version of that Google Doc specifically for the trustees, so you can share your comments and feedback electronically there as well. This feedback from the advisory committees and through the open house will help us finalize the strategic plan. And it will help us to ensure that our final plan reflects the needs of the community and the district, that it's shaped by the stories of our students, staff, and our families, and that it considers the implementation of what we've learned in the current strategic plan. So we'll leave you with the discussion questions that are posed at the end of the report, but I'm also happy to answer any questions and to hear your insights on this draft.
Trustee Aziz, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I want to take a moment to appreciate the work done by Ms. Rahim and the entire READ staff. I can't believe we're in May. So the fact that you're sharing with us that, you know, next month we'll receive the strat plan is very exciting. And I appreciate the discussion questions and the length in which the consultation has worked with many of our committees and the public. It's outstanding. My only concern, and I bring this up to ask for potentially staff review or comment and follow up in the coming weeks, kind of offline. I appreciate that Indigenous reconciliation is explicitly outlined under social responsibility. I'm wondering if there is space under that heading or one of the other of the three to explicitly add equity. I understand equity is included in some of the other subcategories of who, what, where, when, why, but I would really like to see equity highlighted under the three bullets because it is so important that we achieve equitable outcomes for all of our students. And I just wanted to highlight that that is something we've heard throughout the consultations and would like to see potentially emphasized somewhere. We'll leave staff to find the appropriate place for that if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, trustee Aziz. Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I also want to commend you. This is a fantastic draft, and I echo the sentiment that I'd like to see more equity highlighted. But I also have a very specific question about well-being. Under how will we see impact, or how will we measure progress? I understand that we're not talking here about how we're going to necessarily operationalize everything, but one of the first points is that you say that you want to improve access to mental health services and capacity to support student mental health needs. So my question is, while that is absolutely something that we should be doing, is it actually something that we can do at a board level? It seems to me that the lack of access to mental health services for youth in our city is something that is a Board of Health issue, is a provincial issue, but is not necessarily something that we are going to be able to address at a school board level. So thinking, because we really wanted to make sure that we could be accountable for these goals, that all of that the strategic plan would be something that we could say, yes, we've achieved these goals. I'm wondering whether we're making very large statements that are admirable, but not necessarily achievable.
Thank you, trustee Kaplan-Murphy. Director Giroux.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the question very much. And I think the trustee has done a brilliant job reflecting on the complexity of mental health supports. And there's a difference between what we do inside the school system and what can happen in the community. And there's an important relationship there. I can invite Superintendent Simmons to speak a little bit about that to you, but we are working on a mental health plan that gets, to our own strategy and how we do that resourcing internally. And so this document is intended to reflect our internal work and our partnerships, but certainly not to resolve the community service level issues that are there.
Superintendent Simmons.
Chair, through you, sorry about that. I don't have a lot to add beyond what Director Giroux had to offer. We are very much focused on prevention and promotion when it comes to the provision of mental health supports and services, as well as collaboration with our community partners. So we do have control over some of the things that we're able to do to help support student well-being at the tier 1 level, in particular within our own school district. So when I looked at that, that was where I thought the focus would be. I think the trustee has raised an excellent point around the pressures that are experienced when we look at this at a community level, but within the OCDSB and the OCDSB strategic plan, focusing on, I think I used the phrase the other day, but staying in our lane is where we're focused on in terms of that element of the strat plan.
Thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you to both of you. That's very helpful. And I know that we'll have to loop back around to discussing that as we go forward with the strategic plan. But I think that making sure that we do have very specific plans in place to collaborate with community and focus on prevention, as you said, those are important. I just want to know that what we're saying here aren't just grand statements, but that we're actually going to do something to help youth mental health.
Thank you for that. Over to Ms. Line.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I would like to congratulate Dr. Rahim and her staff for an excellent report and for a very good summary tonight. Thank you. I noticed that May 15th at Tech, you're having an open house. There was a bullet on, I think, the previous slide that mentioned advisory committees. So I'm wondering, is there a deadline for input on the strat plan for the advisory committees?
Through you, Madam Chair. So we are hoping to bring the final plan back to the board in June. So we have the toolkit scheduled on the next advisory committee meeting for each of the advisory committees so that they'll have time during their next meeting to have those in-person conversations. And in cases where a meeting either doesn't take place over the next month, or in some instances, if for some reason a committee doesn't have quorum and isn't able to meet in person, then we have developed a secondary toolkit that allows them to have those conversations outside of formal meeting time, where they can still engage electronically and add comments to the document and share those back with me.
Ms. Lyon?
Yeah, and I guess, is there a deadline for input?
So the deadline would be the month of May is the time to provide input that we would be looking for feedback. The last week of, the first week of June would be the latest we would be able to accept that feedback.
Thank you, Dr. Reem. Over to Trustee Evans.
Hi, so I've got two comments. My first comment, I guess, was a question. When did we land on equity of access in the mission statement?
Dr. Reem?
So the mission statement evolved out of the conversations at the retreat and the trustee professional development session that we had the end of April and early March. And it started as a draft from the facilitator who helped guide us through those conversations and consolidate some of that feedback. And then through follow-up conversations with the senior team, refining the language for the mission statement and trying to capture what we felt was heard during those sessions.
The reason I asked is I remember a lot of conversation about equity of outcome. And I feel like that might be more, excuse me, I've got the hiccups, reflective of the discussion that I recall. So we might want to go back and take a look at that. The other piece that I was hoping to see was under the key work section, a review of credit accumulation in the carceral system. So we are responsible for, or we are co-responsible for education for people in custody who are under the age of 18. And I would like us to make sure that their learning outcomes are, happening and that they are getting meaningful education while in custody. And so I'd like to make sure that we look at that. And so I was hoping to see that under the learning section. Dr. Rahim?
Director Giroux?
So through you, Madam Chair, you'll see that we've tried to strike a balance in terms of how granular we are in the key work at this stage, recognizing that year over year we'll be looking at action plans. But the idea of looking at credit accumulation in particular groups of students is in the student achievement and program quality and accessibility. So we can go back and take a look at where that fits, but it fits more in the action planning level than it does, I think, in the key level, in the key work stated in this document.
Okay, I can live with that. But I would like us to go back and take a firm look at equity of outcome. Those are my two comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Evans. Over to Ms. Miller, please.
Hi, I would like to make a request that the toolkit that you're talking about, if it could come to IAC before the meeting so we can review, that would be helpful. And then just secondly, love the opening statement to provide students with equitable opportunities. So important. Would love to see a little bit more like reference to that within. And just the equity, diversity, and inclusion. That all sounds lovely, nurturing. But what it really comes down to is providing resources. So that really need that connection to, you know, there's a vast amount of students that do well, do okay. And then there's this minority, as we'll see, that don't do well, but need resources. And just hoping that somehow you like maybe having one of those sections devoted to equity, you could get those indicators and impacts, right? So yeah, thank you.
Is that all, Ms. Miller? Thank you for your feedback. Trustee Scott.
First of all, thank you very much to staff, all of the staff, as well as the trustees for the thoughts that have gone into this document. One thing, and I think it's a really important thing. Under social responsibility, we have a number of references to progress towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We talk about more of things, but I think the other thing that is really important here, if we are serious about the first aspect, what does success look like? It also needs to be different things. We need to change some of our practices, not just add more to things.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. Trustee Milburn.
I want to echo my colleagues' sentiments and thank staff so much for their hard work on this strategic plan. It is an amazing first draft. One point of reflection or takeaway I do have, and it was one of the first things I noticed, under the how will we see impact, one thing that I'd like to consider is how we can quantify the impact. So for an example, when we say a reduction in achievement gaps for marginalized and underserved students, if we could say we want to see the reduction by 50% or quantifying that a bit more, I think that is something that we could reflect upon and maybe integrate into the plan. I don't know if staff want to comment or.
So our next item is a student achievement report. And when we get to that, you'll get a better understanding of the complexity of setting goals and the complexity of the reporting. And then maybe we can reflect on how we might achieve that.
Is that all, Trustee Milburn? Thank you. Trustee Dixon?
Thank you, Just Chair. Andrew, I'd like to say I really, really like what you've done, but I also have to echo what Lily, Alicia, and Lara has said when it comes to the equity and diversity. I think we really need to look at our minority community a little bit more and be able to see how they're going to actually be able to achieve a lot more than what we want to see. So, but I love it.
Thank you, Trustee Dixon. Anyone else? All right. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. We'll just wait for some chair shuffling. Thank you for joining us, and I will turn to Director Giroux to introduce the Student Achievement Update.
Thanks very much. So it's a very fortunate evening for this committee to have this group of very talented minds here to do a presentation. We started thinking about the trustee orientation process in August or September, and we started thinking about what your training needs were and what that would look like when we got into reporting. And we made a decision at that time that we would think about a student achievement report after you'd had a chance to get settled into your roles and learn a little bit more about the system and be familiar with some of the many acronyms and program references and data references that are going to be sent your way in this presentation. So I would like to acknowledge the work of Superintendent Smith, who was assistant principal in the room with Superintendent Tuage at the time that I walked in and said, so exactly when do we think we could get this forward? And to Manager Oracheski and her team, who tonight in the room with her is Kate Jubenville and Vitancho, who have worked so diligently to bring this together. And we're particularly fortunate tonight because for those of you who are newly elected, you haven't had the opportunity to have very many reports from Manager Oracheski, who has led our research team for many, many years. And I'm not going to say much more than that because she'll get very angry and upset with me. But she's going to do her presentation tonight. But I'm going to invite Superintendent Smith just to lay the framework before we turn it over to the research team to share the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle, and through you, Chair. The purpose of this report tonight is to provide an update on student achievement outcomes and also program pathways by having a look at where there's a disproportionate representation of specific groups of students in various OCDSB programs, and to measure how well we're doing in terms of achievement. Of note, this report is also the first one to really look at the effects of the grade 9 de-streaming in mathematics. So that's really exciting. The other piece that's really important to acknowledge as we look at this report is a lot has changed since the last time you had a look at one of these types of reports in 2019 and 2020. So really important that the context of this report is, we're still looking at the lasting impacts of some of the pandemic on students, staff, and their families. We've had the introduction in the midst of this time of a new math curriculum, updated and renewed provincial standardized assessments, including a rollout of a virtual EQAO last year, as well as de-streaming. So before I invite Vitancho and Kate to provide some of the highlights of the report, I also want to acknowledge that along with some significant success stories here, like there's a lot of good in this report. We also acknowledge that we've got a lot of work to do. And if you look into the appendixes, you'll see a lot more of the data, a lot deeper dive into the data, but also really important looking at some of the key initiatives. This is not, none of this work is one department's work. This really, and there is no, there is no one single answer to student achievement. It really is a cross-departmental work. So I hope that when you go through the appendixes and really see some of those key initiatives, you see how the cross-departmental nature of the work we do really strives to provide environments that allow all students to flourish academically, socially, and emotionally. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Research Officer Kate Jubenville.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The focus of this report is on enrollment and achievement data from the 2021-2022 school year, with change assessed relative to our previous reporting period, so the 2019-2020 report to which we make reference to. Reporting practices are consistent with the previous report, with further detail and consideration outlined on pages 16 through 18 of Appendix A, so we won't get into that level of detail right now. Moving to an overview of the data for students in grades 1 through 8, we've seen enrollment has increased slightly in English with core French, and there continues to be disproportionate representation for specific groups of students in elementary programs. So you can see that on pages 4 and 5 of the appendix. With the exception of mathematics, where there's been a change in curriculum, achievement outcomes have remained relatively stable, with immersion programs tending to yield higher outcomes. Although differential outcomes remain across specific groups of students, there is some evidence of progress towards narrowing the achievement gap for students with special education needs, excluding gifted. I'll now pass the mic over to my colleague Vitancho for an overview of the secondary results.
Thank you, Kate. In terms of enrollment at the secondary level, although de-streaming was formally introduced only in grade 9 mathematics in the 2021-22 academic year, the data actually shows that a notable shift towards higher enrollment in academic level courses was achieved not only in mathematics, but also in English and science. And this is true at the student population level, as well as for specific groups of students, such as multilingual learners, students residing in low-income neighborhoods, males and females, students self-identifying as Indigenous, and students with special education needs, excluding gifted. Specifically in the 2021-22 academic year, 95% of students enrolled in grade 9 mathematics were in the D-stream course, which is an increase from 75% of students enrolled in academic level mathematics in the 2019-20 academic year. This represents 1,000 more students having the opportunity to access secondary pathways. The shift is also particularly encouraging for students residing in low-income neighborhoods, students who self-identify as Indigenous, and students with special education needs, excluding gifted. During the same time period, enrollment in locally developed courses stayed stable. As for achievement in general, secondary achievement outcomes in grade 9 and 10 have remains relatively stable over the past 3 years, with noticeable improvement in English across academic, applied, and locally developed courses. And also consistent with previous years, achievement outcomes continue to be the highest in academic level courses, and differential outcomes for specific groups of students continue to exist. Also notably, progress has been made towards meeting the provincial standard for multilingual learners, students residing in low-income neighborhoods, and male students since the last report. And finally, in terms of achievement in grade 9 D-stream mathematics in particular, it is important to note that overall achievement remained high, with the percentage of students meeting the provincial standard increasing from a combined applied academic rate of 69% in 2019-20 to 71% in 2021-22. Pass rates have also remained stable over the same time period. And finally, there is still some evidence to indicate that, however, more attention is required to close gaps in achievement for students who self-identify as Indigenous and those with special education needs, excluding gifted. And from here, I would like to invite Superintendent Smith to speak about current board initiatives directed at supporting student learning.
Thanks, Vitancho. And through you, Chair, I'm going to highlight just 2 or 3 initiatives that I think are really important. And they don't represent all of the work. As I said, that appendix includes a ton of the key initiatives that are there, but there's a couple small things and a couple big things that we've done that I think are really worth highlighting. The IAL department and programming and learning together have put a student success teacher at the Family Reception Center. As you know, the Family Reception Center is the first spot for a lot of newcomers, and having a student success teacher in there, what that means is that those students can be assessed for prior learning credits. Oh, there you go. Sorry about that. Assessed for prior learning credits. So they get a leg up. They're not coming into school behind. It allows them to accelerate their journey towards their diploma. Small thing, but huge results. Resulted in hundreds of credits provided to those students based on their past learning. The other piece I'd like to highlight is the cross-departmental work on literacy. Seems like a natural fit for programming and learning, but we're really working closely with all the central departments to look at both early interventions for reading and also ensuring that the tools are in place, both the diagnostic tools, the tools at the level of the student desk, including the type of texts that we need to really firm up the foundations of reading, but also ensuring that principal learning is happening in literacy to ensure that they can lead the instructional programs at their schools. And the other piece I'd really like to highlight is just the work on de-streaming. So right now, de-streaming teams have been put together from every secondary school across the district. They've been meeting on a regular basis, not just to look at achievement, but also to look at student success. I think all the central departments have taken a lead role in this work, and it's really helping forward not only a lot of the thinking, but a lot of the work that's happening at the level of the classroom. So that's just a highlight of kind of three of the initiatives that are there. I think given the time, what we'll do, there's lots of information in that report for you to look at, but I think at this time we'll take questions.
That's perfect. Thank you, Superintendent Smith. I'll look to Trustee Aziz, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I'm just gonna wait for the timer to show up. Beautiful, thank you. Thank you all for, I'm gonna scooch forward. Thank you all for for your work on this. I'm sure you've heard me say this a million times since the beginning of the term that I am incredibly grateful for the detailed data and information to better understand the impact of our policies. As a new trustee, I find it very helpful in understanding the context of, you know, the acronyms and the lingo that goes around. And so for those who only had a chance to skim the report, I'm very excited to read some of the data about the de-streamed math achievement outcomes, for example, described on page 8. Achievement outcomes in de-streamed grade 9 were slightly higher than combined rates across applied and academic mathematics. In 2019 to 2020, the percentage of students meeting the provincial standard has risen. Very brief, won't go into the details. That's very exciting, as you guys are aware. But same for the subset of students for whom Valuing Voices data is available. Higher proportions of students who identified as Black, Middle Eastern, Latino, Latina, Latinx, or Southeast Asian met the provincial standard. It's very exciting. I will say I'm kind of geeking out a little bit, so I really appreciate the work and the detail. I have a handful of questions. I want to double check that we'll be getting this type of report every year regarding, yes, I'm not going to swear it. That's so exciting. Okay. And then my question regarding contacting grade 8 parents about academic and applied, is that going to continue every year as well? Amazing. And I read about gender inclusive gym classes. Is that offered in the grade 9 option at all high schools? In some high schools, do we know what the enrollment rate is for that? And its potential reception, or if that's something we can follow up on later, happy to do so as well. We can follow up. Okay, perfect. My last question. Oh, yes, time. This is very exciting, as you've heard VP a little bit today. Will there be opportunity in reading this report, or if I can ask now to follow up on how trustees can continue to support equitable practices that see the kind of reductions and improvements in achievement pathways for our historically underserved communities, and how we can continue to support that as trustees and working with our partners and with staff. Does that make sense? That question makes sense?
I'll turn it over to Director Giroux.
I'll start and the team may want to add to it. So appreciate the comments. And in terms of the reporting, so when we look at the strat plan and we look at the measuring progress, this is a key report for measuring progress, right? This is where you look at your student data. And when we look at the equity pieces in the strat plan, where it talks about meeting the needs of all learners, and we don't go, and I heard the concerns about not getting granular enough or not seeing the word equity enough. But when the data comes, you'll see that we're looking at different groups of students and doing that analysis, right? So this is your reporting tool for student achievement. There was a question about what can trustees do? And so there are, I think, a few things. So one is, you know, the priority setting exercise that we're going through, right? And looking at that. We will come back over the course of the plan with specific initiatives, the roadmap, et cetera. We will get to budget decisions where we're looking at resourcing this way or that way. And that's an opportunity to participate, right? And, you know, we've often said when we are talking about issues or dealing with issues, we should be thinking about the school and classroom conversations and impact rather than the boardroom conversations and impact, right? So if we're focusing our conversations on what's happening, you know, or how does this decision affect the classroom. That's really always making sure that we're having a positive impact on this kind of data. I'll hand it over to the team to see if they have any other specific things they want to add to that.
Superintendent?
Thank you, through you, Chair. My only comment, and Michelle, you kind of said at the very end there, was just to make sure that our conversations always come back to students, always come back to the level of the student desk, because I think sometimes it is easy to get caught up in other things. And I think that it's really important that we have, Nadia always used to talk about having a laser-like vision, a laser-like focus on what's happening at the student desk. So that would be the only piece I'd add. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, both for your answers, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Trustee Aziz. Over to Trustee Scott.
Thank you. It's a super report. It's going to take a long time to digest the huge amount of information that's in it. But looking at the detailed stuff, one thing I came across was table 2C, which talks about the elementary grade 1 to 8 achievement in French. And what I was wondering was, how do we know whether or not our students meet the provincial standard? Because I couldn't remember whether or not they did the EQAO tests and things like that in English or French when they did them, if they were in immersion.
So meeting the provincial standard is something that can be measured. And we referred to it as high expectations here, and it's defined as the percentage of students who have a mark equivalent to a 70% or a B-. So based on the final report card mark, that is what we used. And we use that cutoff that's set as the provincial standard to determine what proportion of students or percentage of students met the standard, and then disaggregated by individual groups.
So it is based entirely on the classroom marks then, as opposed to any external EQAO equivalent.
The nature of this report is only with June final report card marks.
Thanks very much for that clarification. That helps.
Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you, through you, Chair. This is a great report, and I echo Trustee Aziz's enthusiasm. I have a question around French immersion, because while we're looking at student achievement, we have to look not just at the achievement gaps, but what are we going to do about them? And I think we can say pretty fairly that the disproportionately lower enrollment of low socioeconomic status students, males, Indigenous students, multilingual learners, students with special education needs and other disabilities, those are gaps that we have turned a blind eye to again and again and again. And what are we going to do about that? Can we consider de-streaming French immersion? Can we consider pushing French immersion to middle immersion or some other strategy so that we don't, right from the beginning of a child's educational career, stream them into either the English or French? And I think there are larger consequences to that disparity, the English versus French immersion disparity, that are really relevant in our district. Maybe this doesn't happen in other districts, but it definitely happens in our district. So my question is, what can we do to address that disparity so that we don't just see every year on this amazing report that we have an ongoing issue where these are the kids, these are the students who are being either left out of French immersion or rerouted into English as soon as they no longer are seen as thriving in French.
Director Giroux.
I'll start and then turn it over to the superintendent. So first of all, I think one of the things that the trustee has captured in the question is the complexity of program offerings in this district. And it's important for you to understand that we are very fortunate to have a rich diversity of program offerings, but it definitely adds considerable complexity to the delivery. And you see when we get to reporting, it gets complex also. So that's the first piece I think to respond to. The second piece I think is it's really important to recognize and value the tremendous work that has been underway for several years to specifically address the needs of specific groups of students. So that's some of the work that's in our Indigenous and Equity Roadmap. And that's some of the intentional strategies that the team has been using and that are outlined in the report. And the superintendent will speak to that. And then to the very last part of your question, which is a bit more tactical, I will hand it over to the superintendent to respond.
Superintendent?
Thank you through you, Chair. I will speak specifically to what we're doing in terms of the schools that have been underserved, quite frankly, in the past. We've got coaches, literacy coaches and numeracy coaches in 25 of our target schools right now. Every single one of those schools has a coach attached to a kindergarten and a grade 1 class. Every single one of those classes has I'm going to say it again, a coach attached to that class, and they're working on foundational literacy work. In the past, I think what we've done is prioritize sometimes program ahead of the specificity. And when I'm speaking about program, sorry, I'm speaking about a particular instructional program ahead of some of the foundational skills that we haven't been as intentional as we should be around identifying. I'll give you an example. A student who comes out of kindergarten who knows all of their letters, and they know the sounds that those letters make, and they can form those letters. That's a literacy skill that sticks and shows later on in their academic career that it's a foundation and a building block of literacy. I don't think we've been specific enough in the past with some of those pieces around, especially decoding in that area. So I'm not answering your question specifically around program, because that's really not within my purview to answer right now. I think that's a lot of your work, but I can certainly say that we haven't been disregarding those students. You know, we've been putting the supports into those schools. So again,
I think it's great to have literacy coaches, but we still have a high attrition rate for specific students from French immersion.
Absolutely.
And that is an equity issue. And it's an equity issue because of the way it then plays out later in education in our school system. In many, and I guess the other thing is that you've commented that you can't address the intersectionality when you're taking into account these disparities, but there's always intersectionality. So it's, you know, if you walk through a school and on one side of the school you have classrooms full of French immersion kids, and who are those kids? Those are by and large higher socioeconomic groups. Those are more girls. Those are more children who have various different supports and resources at their fingertips at home, versus the kids who are across the hall in a core English program. So we are letting those kids down. So I guess that, you know, and maybe we have to have at some point a motion to suggest that we de-stream French in the, you know, Ottawa district, but perhaps there needs to be something done to change this pattern, which has been true for so long.
So I think that if we go back to the strategic planning conversation, where we see under learning that commitment to program reviews, that's precisely what you're getting at. And so that has been captured in terms of the work that, you know, will come before you in the next few years. We just need to understand the magnitude of work that's associated with program reviews and the complexity of English programs and French immersion programs and alternative programs and special education programs and secondary programs and alternate programs. And we will need to do some thinking about what's a reasonable model and approach to program review, and how do we order the events and activities, and what are the decision-making points, right? And I think if we start, you know, we've started a little bit of thinking about how do we imagine working through this, even in the balance of your term, because it's a lot of work. We'll need to make sure that we have a workable model that comes to the board for key decision points, but that, you know, there's a process and structure that allows the work to happen. So.
Thank you, Director. Anyone else? Sorry, yes, Trustee Nash, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, thank you, Chair. Excellent report. I spent an hour reading it, and Yes, there's a wealth of information. And at the end, there's some very pertinent questions and which I wasn't able to answer. And I will turn one of them particularly to you. What stood out in the data in terms of that you didn't recognize, that you were surprised by, disappointed? Just your reflection on that.
Superintendent?
Yeah, through you, Chair. My glass tends to be half full most of the time, and so I have to say that the piece that was most the piece that stuck most with me in this report really was the idea with that grade 9 D stream math class, just how the achievement stuck. We did not see a decline. Despite bringing students in applied and academic together, we did not see a decline in achievement. In fact, we saw outcomes for those students actually increase. So I think that what I walk away with from this report is really around that piece, and knowing that we've got 14-year-olds, 1,000 more 14-year-olds who did not have those opportunities before, who were in applied level courses to achieve. So I think that the piece, Suzanne, that I still resonates with me most is just the success of that. And that's on the educators really believing in this work and believing in the importance of it. So that's my single biggest takeaway from this. And I tell everyone about it, that we've created these opportunities for students that wouldn't have existed before. And that's really exciting to me.
Thank you.
Right. Anyone else? All right. I believe the director has some comments.
Thank you very much. And thanks to this team for this report. This is, I think, the last meeting that Manager Oracheski will do a presentation at. And you can see that she's been working hard to hand over the reins to her team. She's going to kill me for this. But last week, we had a gathering to celebrate Joan's time with the district. And I did a rough estimation of the number of meetings I thought Joan might have attended. And you need to know that over the last 3 years, one of the things I've been really working with Joan on is having her team come and support her so that she didn't have to do every single night and every single advisory committee and every single committee of the whole, because she would take this report and bring it to all of those committees herself. So I estimated that over the last 18, no, I'm not right on the number of years of service. 19 in this role, I estimated maybe 500 board committee and advisory committee meetings. And, you know, she verified the data, but we owe a huge debt of gratitude to Joan for the leadership she's provided and for the team that she's built and for what she has taught us about understanding data. And I'm very grateful on behalf of the staff. I express my appreciation. And I know the chair has a few words.
Thank you, Director, for those words. And Joan, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I'd like to thank you for your service to the OCDSB. I had the honor and privilege of attending your retirement party, and I got there about a half an hour, 45 minutes into it, and I walked in and I saw a former associate director who became a director. I saw the former director. I saw our current director. I saw retired superintendents who live not close to 133, who made the effort to come in. I saw lots of other retired staff, and of course, many staff who are with us now. And I can tell you, over the last 12 years, it's been an honor for me to work with you. I have watched you, as Michelle has said, sit before this board, not this one in particular much, but previous boards, and I've watched you answer with dignity and grace some of the most bizarre data questions that anybody could ever possibly come up with, and you never lost your cool. Again, always with dignity and grace, and I know that you've been a great mentor to the people in your department, but I really don't, and I'm sure you've done a great job at that, but I really don't know what we're going to do without you. And I wish you all the very best on the next leg of your journey. And if you're like any other OCDSB retiree, you'll probably be back next September. But anyways, with that in mind, I would like us all to stand and honor Joan.
Through you, Chair, thank you. I'm a very emotional person at the best of times. It has been a very rewarding and fulfilling career. And it is hard to let things go. But I have an amazing team that I'm leaving behind who will carry the path forward and make changes for the best, I'm sure, in the system and for the students and the staff that we support. So it has been a pleasure to serve and work for this board, and I really appreciate everybody's support and kind words. So thank you.
All right, I will now ask for our trustee representatives to OPSPA to provide a report. Trustee Scott.
If you can give me half a second till I find it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We, Trustee Jenkins and I were in attendance at the Board of Directors meeting that was held at the end of April in Toronto. Among other things, we did do some review of recent changes in legislation and also of changes in the government in terms of the advocacy work that OPSPA continues to do. We became aware of the announcements of some significant retirements in the staff of the Ministry of Education, which would include Deputy Minister Nancy Naylor, as well as several assistant deputy ministers who will be leaving later this year. And that will create changes in terms of how we are able to connect and how our staff are able to connect with ministry people. I remind all trustees that we are having the annual general meeting of the Ontario Public School Boards Association in June, at which time new officers will be chosen, and the nominations for most things closed today, but the information has been provided, I believe, to all trustees that for those positions where nominations from the floor are possible. There was also some discussion of education funding with no details beyond the kinds of level of detail that we have already been provided here. So I won't try to get into that. And I think that's just about it.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. Does anyone have any questions for Trustee Scott? Seeing none, I will now look to Trustee Lee for an OSSA report, if there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very brief report. OSTA has, there's two items. OSTA has decided to reinstate the MTC program for next year. Information on how to sign up for that program is available through the individual schools. The one word of caution on that item is that, as I've mentioned before, with the current capacity of the system, while the MTC program is being reinstated, the availability is going to be much lower than even pre-pandemic. So just a word of caution for that one. The other item is that OSTA did approve its budget for next year at the end of April. There were improvements to the budget. So last time I brought forward a approximate 8% increase to the hit to OCDSB. The finalized budget is a 3.7% increase, though that still is higher than what the GSNs for transportation provides for. The one caveat with the approved budget is that the improvements are have a large portion in a program that's being run through OC Transpo that allows for students 12 and under to have free transportation. on the system. So that mostly affects grade 7 students who might be getting Presto cards. The budget is highly influenced on that program being in effect for the entirety of next school year, given that OC Transpo does its budgeting in February. So if they cancel that program during their next budget cycle, there will be a significant impact later in the year.
Thank you. Any questions for trustee Lee? Ms. Lyon?
Thank you, Chair, and through you, trustee Lee. With respect to the empty seat program and lower availability next year, there have been some incidents that that I have been involved with where parents are unable to get a seat on a school route, even though they have circumstances that warrant it, that might involve human rights accommodations such as a disability. How will this empty seat program and the lower availability next year impact families in those situations? For example, there's a family this year that received an accommodation until the end of the school year, only with a caveat that there would be no guarantee that their spot would be renewed next year. So this is very concerning to some parents. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the planning process, OSTA has the eligibility requirements or eligibility for transportation as outlined under our board's policies, and all those students receive transportation. So the students that use the empty seat program are those who are not eligible under our policy. Whether we decide to make adjustments to it, that's our policy. That's up for us to discuss in terms of students to get placements on the empty seat program. That's all done through OSTA's planning group. And I am not privy to the specifics of the decision-making on that one.
So trustee Lyon, the nature of your questions are very operational, and I would encourage you to take them up with the staff at OSTA.
Yeah, that's fine. Could I just have one quick follow-up? What is a GSM?
It's the grants for student needs. It's the funding that the board, this board receives from the ministry. Transportation is paid directly through this board to OSTA.
Any other questions? Is there any new business? I'd like to turn the mic over to, the chair over to trustee Jennings, as I have new business myself.
Go ahead, please.
All right. I'd like to give notice of motion that I have put forward a motion in regards to the OCDSB relationship with the Ottawa Police Service. And I'm hoping given what has gone on lately, that this motion will be debated in June. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the note? No. Okay, back over to you, Chair.
All right. I now declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And we will resume shortly for our special board meeting.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the May 9, 2023 special board meeting to order. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin homelands. I would like to thank the Algonquin nations for hosting this meeting on their land. I would now like to ask if anyone has an interest to declare, to please do so now. If there are any, I would like to remind members to share declarations in writing to board services immediately following this meeting. I would now like to move to matters for action for this evening. And the first item is to call upon the trustee Blackburn to give an oral report on the May 9, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The board met in committee of the whole this evening and reports and recommends as follows. Approval of P.073.gov Board Member Code of Conduct. Moved by Trustee Lee, which I will second, that the proposed changes to policy P.073.gov Board Member Code of Conduct attached as Appendix A to Report 23-036 be approved.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. I now call for a vote on the recommendations and ask Manager Guthrie to open the vote.
Very quick clarification. That was as amended, right?
Yes, I apologize. I forgot the words as amended.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions, clarification? So we may now proceed for the vote.
Through you, Madam Chair, waiting for Trustee Bell.
I'm sorry. Unfortunately, there was no sound on my end. Can you quickly repeat what was said?
You want me to repeat it?
I'm just assuring that I'm voting in favor of the motion at this point because I haven't heard sound. I'm not sure if the recording was not properly on, but there was no sound for quite a significant part of the time.
Yes, Trustee Bell, we're voting on the board member code of conduct as amended that was moved by Trustee Lee that I seconded.
Great. I vote in favor. Thanks.
And the vote passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the appointment of members to Ad Hoc Policy Review Committee. I would now like to open the floor for volunteers or nominations for the members on this committee. I will remind you that we are seeking 4 trustees for this committee. The chair is the 5th member and sits ex officio. Trustee Presley.
I'd like to nominate Trustee Milburn.
Is there a seconder? Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Trustee Melbourne, do you accept the nomination?
I accept the nomination.
Thank you. Are there other nominations? Trustee Aziz?
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, Catherine. Trustee Melbourne. Trustee Kaplan-Murth, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Are there other nominations? Trustee Scott?
I would like to self-nominate.
Is there a seconder? Trustee Presley? Are there other nominations? Trustee Kaplan-Murphy?
I forget who we nominated so far. I would like to nominate trustee Aziz.
Trustees, is there a seconder? Trustee Presley, thank you. Trustee Presley, Trustee Aziz, sorry, do you accept the nomination?
You want it? No, I'm kidding. I do, thank you.
And I understand that Chair Lyra has her hand up.
I was also intending to nominate Trustee Aziz.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing none. So we are going to have a closing of nominations. So if there are no other nominations, then I would ask for a motion to close the nominations for the trustee members of the Ad Hoc Policy Review Committee. Is there a seconder for the motion? Trustee Presley? Moved by Trustee Presley and seconded by Trustee Melbourne, that nominations for the trustee members of the Ad Hoc Policy Review Committee be closed. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Passed unanimously. Thank you. How many we've had? We don't need elections. We have 4. Perfect. Excellent. Wow. Excellent. No elections. All right. So I'm pleased to announce that the members of the Ad Hoc Policy Committee are Trustee Melbourne, Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, Trustee Scott, and Trustee Aziz. And Trustee Lyra, of course, as ex officio and chair. Thank you very much. Are there any matters for information? Seeing none, I declare this meeting adjourned.